chlorinated water still stung Marcus's cheek where her hand had struck him. Karen Whitfield, the woman who'd just assaulted him in his own backyard, now stood at his property line with a clipboard and a cold smile, pointing at his house, like it was a condemned building. "This neighborhood has standards," she'd hissed through the fence. What Marcus didn't know was that Karen had already filed 3 separate complaints with the city that morning. What Karen didn't know was that Marcus had security cameras rolling, and her husband was about to discover exactly who his wife really was. The first time Marcus Chen noticed the woman watching him through the chain-link fence, he'd been floating, on his back in the pool, eyes closed against the late afternoon sun. When he opened them, she was there, middle-aged, blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, arms crossed over a pristine white tennis outfit. She wasn't trying to hide her staring. "Can I help you?" Marcus called out, treading water near the pool's edge. The woman didn't answer immediately. Her gaze swept over his modest backyard, the above-ground pool he'd installed himself, the small deck he'd built from YouTube tutorials, the vegetable garden his grandmother had started before she passed. Finally, her eyes settled back on him, with obvious disapproval. "I'm Karen Whitfield. I live next door." She gestured toward the 2-story colonial that loomed over his small ranch house. "We need to talk." Marcus pulled himself out of the pool, water dripping onto the concrete pad. At 32, he kept himself in good shape, but Karen's scrutinizing stare made him suddenly conscious of his modest surroundings. He grabbed a towel from the deck chair. "What about? Your setup here." Karen's voice carried the kind of authority that suggested she was used to being listened to. "The Homeowners Association has certain standards." "There's no HOA on Maple Street," Marcus said, wrapping the towel around his shoulders. "I checked before I bought the house." Karen's smile was thin and cold. "Not yet, but there will be. I'm organizing the neighbors to establish one. This street has potential, but..." She let her gaze wander over his property again. "Certain elements are bringing down property values." Marcus felt heat rise in his chest that had nothing to do with the sun. "Certain elements? Above-ground pools are an eyesore. That vegetable garden looks unkempt. And frankly, the noise level from your gatherings..." "What gatherings?" Marcus interrupted. "I live alone. The loudest thing I do is mow my lawn. Last weekend, there were at least 6 cars in your driveway. My family came over for my birthday." Marcus's voice hardened. "Is that against some law I don't know about?" Karen stepped closer to the fence, her manicured fingers gripping the chain link. "Look, Mr. Chen. Mr. Chen, I'm trying to be neighborly here. But if you can't maintain your property to neighborhood standards voluntarily, there are other ways to handle the situation." The threat hung in the air like humidity. Marcus had heard rumors about Karen Whitfield since moving to Maple Street 8 months ago. The neighbors spoke about her in hushed tones, how she'd gotten the Hendersons' dog removed for excessive barking, how she'd somehow convinced the city to force old Mr. Kowalski to tear down his tool shed. But Marcus had figured they were exaggerating. "What exactly are you suggesting?" he asked. "The city has very specific codes about residential properties, pool installations, garden maintenance, structural modifications." Karen's smile returned, sharper this time. "I've done my research. I'm sure if someone were to file a complaint, they'd find multiple violations." Marcus stared at her through the fence. In the 8 months since his grandmother's death, this house had been his sanctuary. Grandma Chen had left it to him, the only stable home he'd ever known. She'd raised him here after his parents died, taught him to garden in that same plot of earth Karen was calling unkempt. "Are you threatening me, Mrs. Whitfield? I'm offering you a choice. Clean up your act or face the consequences." Karen turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Chen? That pool of yours? I checked with the city. You needed a permit for that concrete pad. I don't suppose you have one?" The blood drained from Marcus's face. He'd poured that concrete himself, over 2 weekends in March, following online guides and asking advice from the guy at Home Depot. The thought of needing a permit had never crossed his mind. Karen's laugh was like breaking glass. I thought not. You have until next weekend to make some changes, or I start making phone calls. She strutted back toward her house, her tennis shoes clicking against her pristine driveway. Marcus watched her go, his hands clenched into fists around the towel. Through Karen's kitchen window, he could see a man moving around, tall, wearing a suit despite the heat. Her husband, probably. The man looked up and waved briefly in Marcus's direction before disappearing deeper into the house. That evening, Marcus sat on his grandmother's porch swing, a beer growing warm in his hands. The sun was setting behind the Whitfield house, casting long shadows across his yard. He'd spent 3 hours researching city codes online, his stomach sinking with each regulation he read. The pool installation, the deck, even some of his grandmother's garden modifications, none of it was properly permitted. The fines could run into thousands of dollars, money he didn't have. His phone buzzed with a text from his cousin Amy. "How's the new place treating you?" Marcus stared at the message for a long time before typing back, still figuring that out. The next morning, Marcus was up at dawn, frantically researching permit requirements and calling city offices. The bureaucratic maze was exhausting. Each department passed him to another. Forms required other forms, and the fees kept adding up. By noon, he'd estimated it would cost nearly $5,000 to retroactively permit everything, assuming they'd even approve it. He was on hold with the zoning office when he heard voices from the Whitfield backyard. Through a gap in the fence, he could see Karen talking to a man in a city uniform, clipboard in hand. She was pointing directly at Marcus's pool. "You can see the concrete pad extends beyond the property setback requirements," Karen was saying, her voice carrying clearly across the yards. The city inspector made notes, nodding along with her commentary. Marcus hung up the phone and stepped closer to the fence. "Excuse me," he called out. "Is there something I can help you with?" Both Karen and the inspector turned. Karen's smile was triumphant. "Oh, Mr. Chen, perfect timing. This is Inspector Rodriguez from the city. He's just doing a routine compliance. Check." Routine? Marcus stepped through his back door, still in his work clothes. He'd taken the afternoon off to deal with the permit situation. "I wasn't notified of any inspection." Inspector Rodriguez consulted his clipboard. "We received a complaint about unpermitted construction on this property. I'm required to investigate." Marcus felt his world tilting. "I was planning to file for the permits. I just learned about the requirements yesterday." "Unfortunately, that's not how it works," Rodriguez said, not unkindly. "Construction first, permits first. You'll need to either bring everything up to code with proper permits or remove the non-compliant structures." "Remove them?" Marcus's voice cracked. "The pool, the deck, the concrete pad, all of it. Plus, there'll be fines for the code violations." Rodriguez made more notes. "You'll receive official notice within 48 hours. Karen was practically glowing. "I'm sure Mr. Chen will do the right thing, Inspector." After Rodriguez left, Karen lingered by the fence. Marcus stood in his backyard, staring at the pool where he'd spent every evening since moving in, trying to process what had just happened. "I warned you," Karen said softly. Something snapped inside Marcus. 8 months of grief, of struggling, to make the house payments on his teacher's salary, of trying to honor his grandmother's memory. All of it crystallized into pure rage. He strode toward the fence. "You want to destroy everything I have over what? Property values? Because my pool isn't fancy enough for your taste? It's about standards. It's about you being a miserable person who can't stand seeing someone else happy." Karen's face flushed red. "How dare you speak to me like that? I'll speak to you however I want. This is my property. Not for much. Longer if you can't afford to fix your violations." The cruelty in her voice, the casual way she dismissed his entire life, sent Marcus over the edge. "Get off my fence! Get away from my house!" "Or what?" Karen stepped closer, her face inches from the chain link. "What are you going to do about it?" Marcus was breathing hard, his vision narrowing. "I'm warning you." "You're warning me?" Karen laughed, sharp and vicious. "You're nobody, a broke teacher living in his dead grandmother's house, swimming." in a kiddie pool. You think you can threaten me? Before Marcus could stop himself, he was at the fence, his hands gripping the metal links. Shut up about my grandmother. Face reality. You don't belong in this neighborhood. You never did. I said shut up. Karen's eyes glittered with malice. The truth hurts, doesn't it? Poor little Marcus can't even afford to keep his grandmother's house legal. What would she think of what you've done to her property? The words hit Marcus like physical blows. His grandmother had worked 2 jobs to keep this house, had scraped and saved to leave him something solid in the world. And now Karen was using that love, that sacrifice, as a weapon. Marcus reached through the fence. He didn't plan it, didn't think it through. His hand us. The police interview lasted 40 minutes. Officer Martinez was thorough but fair, taking notes as Marcus explained his side of the story. Karen had embellished the details, claiming he'd grabbed her shirt and shoved her backward, but the physical evidence didn't quite match her narrative. The scratches on her arms were clearly from rose thorns, and there were no tears in her clothing. Look, Mr. Chen, Martinez said, closing his notebook. Technically, reaching through the fence could constitute attempted assault, even if you didn't make contact. But given the circumstances and Mrs. Whitfield's history with the department, we're going to call this a neighborly dispute for now. Her history? Martinez exchanged a glance with his partner. Let's just say this isn't the first noise complaint involving that address. You might want to invest in some security cameras. After the police left, Marcus sat on his deck, emotionally drained. The sun was setting, casting his backyard in golden light that made everything look peaceful despite the chaos of the day. He was considering going inside when he heard footsteps approaching his fence. Excuse me, Mr. Chen? Marcus looked up to see Karen's husband standing at the property line. Up close, he was younger than Marcus had expected, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and prematurely gray hair. He wore a slightly rumpled button-down shirt and khakis, looking more like a college professor than the corporate executive Marcus had imagined. I'm David Whitfield. I wanted to apologize for what happened today. Marcus stood cautiously. It's not your fault, isn't it? David's smile was rueful. I've been watching this situation develop for weeks. I should have said something sooner. He gestured toward the fence. Mind if I come around? I'd rather not have this conversation through chain link. A few minutes later, David was sitting across from Marcus on the small deck, a beer in his hand and an expression of genuine regret on his face. Karen doesn't know I'm here, David said. She's inside, on the phone with her sister planning her next move. Something about filing a restraining order. Marcus's stomach dropped. A restraining order? She's convinced you're dangerous. Says you displayed threatening behavior and that she fears for her safety. David took a long drink. The thing is, I saw what actually happened from our kitchen window. Marcus went very still. What did you see? I saw you reach toward her. Yes, but I also saw her stumble on her own and fall into the roses. She was so busy playing up the drama for the neighbors that she didn't realize I was watching. David studied Marcus's face. You never touched her, did you? No. The word came out as barely a whisper. I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to. Grab her and make her understand what she's doing to my life, but I didn't. David nodded slowly. That's what I thought. Karen has a talent for interpreting situations in ways that benefit her narrative. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the evening sounds of the neighborhood. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A lawnmower hummed in the distance. Normal sounds of normal people living normal lives. Everything Marcus was afraid he was about to lose. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked. David was quiet for so long that Marcus thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Because 15 years ago I made the same mistake you almost made today. I actually did grab her during an argument. Nothing violent, just I put my hands on her shoulders to try to make her listen. She called the police then too. Marcus felt cold despite the warm evening. What happened? Charges were dropped, but it didn't matter. She had her story, and I had mine, and guess which one everyone believed? David's laugh was bitter. The successful real estate agent with the perfect house and the wounded victim narrative, or the husband who'd obviously snapped under pressure? Why did you stay with her? Because she convinced me I was the problem, that I had anger issues, that I needed to change, that she was helping me become a better person. David stared into his beer. It took me years to realize that she creates the situations that make people snap. She pushes and pushes until you react, and then you're the unstable one. Marcus thought about the past 24 hours, Karen's calculated cruelty, her systematic destruction of everything he cared about, the way she'd used his grandmother's memory as a weapon. Even now, knowing it was a trap, he could feel the rage building again. So what do I do? That's what I came to tell you. Karen's planning to file that restraining order tomorrow, but she's also escalating the city complaints. She's already called 3 different departments about your property violations. 3? Building and safety, environmental health, and the fire marshal. She's claiming your pool installation might be affecting the water table, and that your deck is a fire hazard because it's too close to the property line. David met Marcus's eyes. She's not going to stop until you're forced to sell. Marcus felt the walls closing in. Between the fines, the legal costs, and now potential criminal charges, he was looking at financial ruin. Even if he could somehow afford to bring everything up to code, Karen would just find new ways to attack. There's something else, David continued. Karen's been in contact with a developer, someone who wants to buy up several houses on this block for a new construction project. What kind of project? Luxury condos, the kind that sell for 3 times what these houses are worth. David's expression hardened. Karen's been promised a significant finder's fee for every property she can help them acquire. Your house is right in the middle of the planned development. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about property values or neighborhood standards. Karen was systematically driving out homeowners so a developer could demolish the entire block. She was getting paid to destroy people's lives. How many others? Marcus asked. You're the 4th. The Hendersons moved out last month after their dog was taken, and they couldn't afford the legal fight to get it back. Mr. Kowalski sold after the city forced him to tear down his shed, and he couldn't afford the fines. The Johnsons down the street are listing their house next week, something about noise violations and parking complaints. Marcus stared across his grandmother's garden, seeing it all differently now. Every plant she'd carefully tended, every improvement she'd made to the house, all of it was just obstacles to be removed so someone could build luxury housing that none of the current residents could afford. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked again. David was quiet for another long moment. Because yesterday I found out Karen's been having an affair. The words hung in the evening air like smoke. Marcus didn't know what to say. 3 months? Now with the developer, a guy named Richard Blackstone. David's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the pain in his eyes. I hired a private investigator after I got suspicious about all her late meetings and sudden business trips. Turns out she's been mixing business with pleasure. David, I'm sorry. Don't be. I stopped loving her years ago. I just stayed. Because, he shrugged. Habit, I guess. Fear of starting over. But watching what she's doing to you, to this whole neighborhood, just for money and some sleazy developer, I can't be part of it anymore. David reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small device, a digital recorder. This morning, before she called the police on you, Karen had a phone conversation with Blackstone. They were laughing about how easy it's been to clear out the undesirable residents. She specifically mentioned you and how your assault was going to make it even easier to get rid of you. Marcus stared at the recorder. You recorded your own wife? I recorded a criminal conspiracy to defraud homeowners and manipulate city officials. Everything she's been doing, the false complaints, the selective enforcement of codes, the coordination with the developer, it's all illegal. David set the recorder on the table between them. I've already made copies. The implications were staggering. If Karen had been filing false complaints, bribing officials, or conspiring to fraudulently acquire properties, she could face serious criminal charges. But more importantly for Marcus, it could invalidate all the violations she'd reported. "What do you want from me?" Marcus asked. "Help me take her down." David's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "I've got the evidence, but I need a victim willing to fight back. Someone she's actively targeting who can file counter-complaints and force an investigation." Marcus thought about his grandmother, about the garden she'd spent decades perfecting, about the house she'd sacrificed to leave him. Karen thought she could erase all of that for money, thought she could drive him out like she'd driven out the others. "What exactly did you have in mind?" David smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Marcus saw hope. "Tomorrow morning, Karen's meeting with her lawyer to file the restraining order. She's also scheduled to meet with Inspector Rodriguez to discuss additional violations she's discovered on your property. What she doesn't know is that I've already contacted Rodriguez's supervisor and the city attorney's office. And while she's busy trying to destroy you, I'm going to file for divorce and present evidence of her criminal conspiracy to both the police and the FBI." David's smile widened. "Fraud involving federal housing programs is a federal crime, Marcus. Karen's about to discover that some people fight back." The security cameras went live at 6:47 a.m. Marcus watched from his kitchen window as the installation crew finished mounting the final unit, a high-definition camera with night vision that had a perfect view of the property line where yesterday's confrontation had occurred. David had been right about his guy. The installer was thorough, professional, and discreet. "Systems recording to cloud storage," the tech explained, handing Marcus a tablet. "Motion activation, sound recording, the works. You'll have a complete record of everything that happens on your property." Marcus was still familiarizing himself with the system when he spotted Karen's white Mercedes pulling out of her driveway. She was dressed for business, navy suit, hair pulled back severely, briefcase in hand, off to file her restraining order, just as David had predicted. What she didn't see was David's Toyota following her at a careful distance. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from David. "Phase 1 is a go. Inspector Rodriguez will be there at 10 a.m. Remember, stay calm, be respectful, and let her hang herself." At exactly 10 a.m., the city inspector's truck pulled up. Rodriguez looked tired and slightly irritated as he walked toward Marcus's front door, but his expression changed when he saw the security cameras. "Those are new," he observed. "Installed this morning. My lawyer suggested it after yesterday's incident." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Smart move. Mind if I ask who's representing you?" Marcus had spent an hour on the phone that morning with David's divorce attorney, a sharp woman named Catherine Pierce who specialized in fraud cases. She'd agreed to take Marcus's case pro bono in exchange for his testimony in David's divorce proceedings. Catherine Pierce from Pierce & Associates. Rodriguez's eyebrows shot up. "Katie Pierce? She doesn't usually handle residential code violations." "No, but she handles conspiracy and fraud cases." The inspector went very still. "Mr. Chen, is there something you need to tell me?" Before Marcus could answer, Karen's Mercedes screeched into her driveway. She was out of the car before it stopped, moving, her face flushed with rage. The restraining order hearing must not have gone as planned. "Inspector Rodriguez," she called out, striding across her perfectly manicured lawn. "Thank goodness you're here. I've discovered additional violations that need immediate attention." Rodriguez turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Whitfield, I wasn't expecting you to be here." "Of course I'm here. As a concerned neighbor, I have every right to observe city inspections on properties that affect my home's value." Karen's smile was sharp as a blade. "I've prepared a detailed list of code violations that weren't addressed in yesterday's initial report." She pulled out a folder thick with documents and photographs. Marcus caught glimpses of pictures taken from different angles of his property, his pool, his deck, his grandmother's garden. Someone had been very thorough. "Mrs. Whitfield," Rodriguez said slowly, "before we proceed, I need to ask you some questions about the complaints you've filed regarding this property." What kind of questions? Questions about the accuracy of your reports and your motivations for filing them. Karen's confident expression flickered. I don't understand. I'm a concerned citizen reporting legitimate violations. Are you? Rodriguez opened his own folder. Because I've been reviewing your complaint history, Mrs. Whitfield. In the past 18 months, you've filed 47 separate violations against 6 different properties on this street. That's unusual. Marcus watched Karen's face cycle through confusion, indignation, and then cold calculation. I have high standards for my neighborhood, Inspector. If other residents can't maintain their properties properly... Mrs. Whitfield, are you familiar with Richard Blackstone? The question hit Karen like a physical blow. Her face went pale, and for a moment she seemed to forget how to speak. What does that have to do with anything? Mr. Blackstone is a developer who's been trying to acquire properties on this block for a luxury condo project. According to records we've obtained, he's been in regular contact with you regarding the availability of these properties. Marcus realized he was holding his breath. David had moved fast, faster than Karen could have anticipated. I don't have to answer these questions, Karen said, but her voice lacked its usual authority. Actually, you do. Rodriguez's tone hardened. Filing false reports with the city is a misdemeanor. Filing false reports as part of a conspiracy to defraud property owners is a felony. So I'll ask again, what is your relationship with Richardy? Blackstone? Karen looked around wildly as if searching for an escape route. Her gaze landed on Marcus, and the hatred in her eyes was so intense it was almost physical. This is his doing, isn't it? She hissed. He's been talking to someone, spreading lies about me. Mrs. Whitfield, Rodriguez said firmly, I need you to answer my questions, not make accusations. But Karen was beyond listening. The careful facade she'd maintained for months was cracking, revealing the vicious core beneath. You want to know about Richard Blackstone? She snapped. Fine. Yes, I know him. Yes, he wants to buy these properties. And yes, I've been helping him identify problem residents who are bringing down the neighborhood's potential. Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. She was actually confessing. Problem residents? Rodriguez pressed. People who don't belong here, who don't understand what this neighborhood could become. Karen's voice was rising, her control slipping completely. Look at this place. Above-ground pools, vegetable gardens, people parking in their driveways instead of garages. It's suburban blight. So you filed false code violations to force them out? I filed legitimate complaints about properties that weren't up to standard. Mrs. Whitfield, I've reviewed every complaint you filed. Half of them cite violations that don't exist. The other half involve codes that were selectively enforced only against properties Mr. Blackstone wanted to acquire. Karen's face was now bright red, veins standing out on her neck. You don't understand. This neighborhood has potential, real potential, but it's being dragged down by people who don't care, who don't invest, who just want to live in their grandmother's house and swim in kiddie pools. The contempt in her voice when she mentioned his grandmother sent white-hot rage through Marcus's chest, but he forced himself to stay quiet. She was destroying herself more effectively than he ever could. Are you saying you conspired with Mr. Blackstone to fraudulently remove homeowners from their properties? Rodriguez asked. I'm saying I tried to help this neighborhood reach its potential, Karen screamed. And if that meant getting rid of the dead weight, then so be it. Rodriguez was writing frantically in his notebook. In the distance, Marcus could see neighbors emerging from their houses, drawn by Karen's increasingly hysterical voice. Mrs. Whitfield, you need to calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. I've spent months working to improve this place, dealing with code violations and trash and people who think they can just do whatever they want on their property. She whirled toward Marcus. Do you have any idea what your little swimming pool has cost me? What your pathetic garden has done to my property values? Karen, stop talking. The voice came from behind them. David was walking across the yard, his face grim. Just stop. Karen spun to face her husband, and Marcus saw something break in her expression. David? What are you doing here? I thought you were at work. I was at the courthouse, filing for divorce. David held up a manila envelope, and delivering evidence of fraud and conspiracy to the district attorney's office. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen stared at her husband as if she'd never seen him before. Divorce? The word came out as a whisper. I know about Richard, Karen. I know about all of it. The affair, the conspiracy, the bribes to city officials. I've been recording your phone calls for weeks. Karen's legs seemed to give out. She sat down heavily on Marcus's front steps, her expensive suit wrinkled, her perfect composure finally shattered. You recorded me? I recorded criminal activity. There's a difference. David's voice was cold, clinical. Inspector Rodriguez. I believe you'll find those recordings very helpful in your investigation. Rodriguez nodded grimly. Mrs. Whitfield, I'm going to need you to come with me to answer some formal questions. I want a lawyer, Karen said numbly. That's your right. But first, I need to officially inform you that all complaints you've filed regarding this property are hereby suspended pending investigation into their validity. Mr. Chen, you won't be receiving any violation notices until this matter is resolved. Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he'd been carrying for days. Thank you. As Rodriguez escorted a dazed Karen toward his truck, she turned back toward Marcus one last time. The hatred was still there, but it was mixed with something else now, the dawning realization of how completely her world had collapsed. This isn't over, she said quietly. Actually, it is, David replied. Your lawyer will explain it to you. As the inspector's truck drove away with Karen in the back seat, Marcus found himself alone with David in his front yard. Neighbors were still watching from their windows, whispers carrying on the morning breeze. Is it really over? Marcus asked. David managed a tired smile. The criminal case is just beginning, but your part in it? Yeah, it's over. Catherine Pierce will handle the civil side. She's very good at getting settlements that I... 3 weeks later, Marcus was floating in his pool at sunset when the first brick came through his living room window. The crash was explosive in the evening quiet, followed by the tinkle of glass hitting his grandmother's hardwood floors. Marcus was out of the water and racing toward the house before his mind fully processed what had happened. The brick lay in a pool of shattered glass, a note rubber-banded around it. Marcus photographed everything before touching anything. Catherine. Pierce had drilled proper evidence handling into him over the past weeks of legal preparation. The note was typed, anonymous. Enjoy your victory while it lasts. Some people never learn when they're not wanted. Marcus called the police, then checked his security cameras. The footage was clear. A figure in dark clothing had approached. From the street, hurled the brick and disappeared into the shadows between houses. The face was obscured by a hood, but the build and movement pattern looked familiar. Officer Martinez arrived within minutes, along with a crime scene photographer. As they documented the damage, Marcus's phone rang. I heard about the brick. David's voice was tight with concern. Are you okay? Fine. Shaken up, but fine. Any chance this is random vandalism? David was quiet for a moment. Marcus, there's something I need to tell you. Karen made bail this morning. The bottom dropped out of Marcus's stomach. I thought you said... Her parents posted bond. They're wealthy, and they hired expensive lawyers. Karen's out pending trial, but she's under a restraining order to stay away from Maple Street. Marcus looked at the brick, then at the security footage on his tablet. David, I think she violated that order about 20 minutes ago. By the time David arrived, the police had finished their initial investigation. The security footage was inconclusive. The figure could have been Karen, but it could have been anyone of similar build. Without a clear view of the face, it wasn't enough for an arrest warrant. This is exactly what she wants, David said, studying the footage. To make you feel unsafe in your own home. To make you want to leave. Well, it's working. Marcus swept glass into a dustpan, his hands shaking slightly. Maybe I should just sell, take whatever I can get and start over somewhere else. That's what she's counting on. David's voice was firm. Karen thinks if she can't destroy you, legally, she'll terrorize you into destroying yourself. Over the next week, the harassment escalated. Marcus's car was keyed in his own driveway. His mailbox was vandalized. Someone dumped garbage in his pool while he was at work. Each incident was captured on his security cameras, but the perpetrator was always masked, always careful to avoid identification. The police increased patrols, but they couldn't be everywhere. Marcus found himself jumping at every sound, checking the cameras obsessively, afraid to leave his house for more than a few hours. "This can't go on," he told Catherine Pierce during a phone consultation. "I'm not sleeping. I can barely focus at work. She's winning." "Actually, she's making mistakes," Catherine replied. "Every incident is being documented. Every violation of the restraining order is evidence. We're building a case for harassment and stalking that will put her away for years." What if she escalates before then? What if next time it's not just a brick? Catherine was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, I'm going to tell you something that legally I probably shouldn't. Karen's lawyers approached me yesterday with a settlement offer." Marcus sat up straighter. "What kind of offer?" "She'll plead guilty to reduced charges, pay you a substantial settlement, and agree to a permanent restraining order if you agree, not to testify in her criminal trial." "How substantial?" "Enough to buy a very nice house in a very nice neighborhood far away from here." Marcus stared out his kitchen window at his grandmother's garden, where tomatoes were finally ripening, and the roses were blooming despite everything that had happened. "She wants me to run away. She wants you to disappear so she can rebuild her reputation and avoid serious jail time. The question is, what do you want?" That night, Marcus sat on his deck despite his fear, despite the cameras and the patrols, and the knowledge that Karen was out there somewhere planning her next move. He thought about his grandmother, who had worked 2 jobs to keep this house, who had never run from anything difficult in her entire life. He thought about the Hendersons, who had given up and moved away, about Mr. Kowalski, who had sold rather than fight, about all the families who would never know this neighborhood existed because Karen had decided they didn't belong. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Take the money and run, teacher boy. Last chance." Marcus stared at the message for a long time. Then he forwarded it to Catherine Pierce and wrote, "I'm not taking the settlement. Let's finish this." The response came immediately. "Are you sure? This could get worse before it gets better." Marcus looked around his backyard, his pool, his deck, his grandmother's garden, everything Karen had tried to destroy, everything that was worth fighting for. "I'm sure," he typed back. "Some things are worth more than money." The final confrontation came 2 days later, on a Saturday morning when Marcus was working in the garden. He was transplanting some of his grandmother's roses when he heard the gate latch click behind him. He turned to find Karen standing in his backyard. She looked terrible, hair unwashed, clothes rumpled, the careful mask of suburban perfection completely gone. In her hand was a manila envelope thick with documents. "You should have taken the money," she said quietly. Marcus slowly stood, keeping his hands visible and his voice calm. The security cameras were recording everything. "Hello, Karen. You're violating your restraining order." "I don't care anymore." She took a step closer. "Do you know what you've cost me? My marriage, my reputation, my business, everything. You cost yourself those things when you decided to become a criminal." Karen's laugh was bitter and broken. "Criminal? I was trying to improve this neighborhood. I was trying to make something beautiful out of this suburban wasteland. By destroying people's lives. By removing obstacles." Karen's voice was rising again, the old venom returning. "You could have left quietly. You could have taken the settlement and started over somewhere more appropriate. But you had to be stubborn. You had to fight." Marcus kept his distance, edging toward the house. "What's in the envelope, Karen?" "Insurance policies, property deeds, financial records." Karen's smile was completely unhinged now. "Everything I could find about you. Your family, your grandmother. Did you know she had a second mortgage on this house? Did you know she was 3 months behind on payments when she died?" The words hit Marcus like physical blows. His grandmother had never mentioned financial troubles. You're lying. I'm very good at research, Marcus. Your precious grandmother was about to lose this house anyway. I'm just finishing what time, and debt started. Karen opened the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Foreclosure notices, liens, bad checks to the grocery store. Marcus felt the world tilting. Stop. She died knowing she was going to lose everything she'd worked for, knowing she was leaving you with nothing but debt and broken dreams. Karen's voice was triumphant, cruel. How does it feel to know that all your fighting has been for a lie? Something snapped inside Marcus. Not the rage he'd felt before, but something colder and more focused. He pulled out his phone and showed Karen the screen, a recording app that had been running since she entered his yard. How does it feel to know you just confessed to stalking, harassment, and blackmail on camera? Karen's triumphant expression faltered. What? Catherine Pierce taught me a few things about evidence gathering. Did you know that in this state, you only need one party's consent to record a conversation? Marcus took a step toward her. You've been in my backyard for 5 minutes, Karen. 5 minutes of you admitting to violating a restraining order, threatening me, and attempting blackmail. The DA is going to love this. Karen looked around wildly, as if suddenly realizing where she was and what she'd done. You can't... You were just destroying the last bit of sympathy anyone might have had for you. Marcus's voice was steady, controlled. Security cameras caught you entering my property illegally. My phone recorded you confessing to crimes. And the best part? You did it all voluntarily. The sound of sirens was growing louder in the distance. Marcus had texted David and Catherine the moment he'd seen Karen in his yard. This is entrapment, Karen said desperately. This is justice. Marcus looked down at the papers scattered around Karen's feet. And just so you know, I already knew about my grandmother's debts. I've been paying them off for 8 months. The house isn't going anywhere. Karen's face crumpled as the police cars pulled into the driveway. I could have made you rich. I could have made this place something special. It already was special, Marcus said quietly. You just couldn't see it. As Officer Martinez led Karen away in handcuffs, this time without bail, according to Catherine Pierce, Marcus knelt down and gathered up the scattered papers. Most of them were copies of documents he already had, records he'd been slowly working through as he settled his grandmother's estate. David appeared at the gate as the police cars drove away. How are you holding up? Marcus looked around his backyard. The garden was thriving. The pool sparkled in the morning sun. The deck his grandmother had loved